The email arrived at 6:42 in the morning. I was still in bed with one hand on my phone and the other resting on the space beside me where my husband should have been. He'd left early for a breakfast meeting. At least that's what he'd told me. I opened my work email out of habit. I scrolled past the usual morning messages. Then I saw one that made my stomach drop. The subject line read, "Internal Compliance Review, Immediate Action Required." I felt my heart start to race. I clicked on the email with shaking fingers. I began reading the message from our company's compliance department. Then I saw his name. Not once. Not twice. I counted as I scrolled. 17 times. My husband's name appeared 17 times in a compliance violation report. I sat up in bed. I read the entire email 3 times. I felt something crack inside my chest. Something that had been holding together for years finally broke apart. That was the moment I realized the truth. My marriage hadn't ended because I stopped loving my husband. It ended because I finally stopped protecting him. I'd been protecting him for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply tell the truth. I'd covered for him. I'd cleaned up his mistakes. I'd rewritten his emails and softened his lies and explained away his reckless decisions. I'd told myself it was love. I'd believed I was being a supportive wife. I'd convinced myself that's what marriage meant. But sitting there reading that compliance report, I finally understood. I hadn't been supporting him. I'd been enabling him. And in the process, I'd become complicit in everything he'd done. For 10 years, I had been the fixer in our relationship. At work, I was a senior compliance analyst for a mid-sized financial firm. I reviewed contracts. I ensured regulatory compliance. I protected the company from legal liability. At home, I was married to Cameron Hayes. I'd met him at a company mixer 8 years ago. I remembered being drawn to his confidence. I'd admired his ambition. I'd fallen for his charm. Cameron worked in our sales department. He made big promises to clients. He earned bigger commissions. He had a talent for pushing right up to the edge of company policy without technically crossing it. At least, that's what I'd told myself for years. The truth was he crossed lines constantly. I just spent my time erasing the evidence. Every time he sent a questionable email, I asked him to forward it to me first. Every time he made a promise that sounded too good to be true, I rephrased it in writing. Every time he cut a corner, I smoothed over the rough edges. "Just double-check this contract language for me," he'd say. Or, "Can you look at this client proposal before I send it?" Or, "I might have overpromised on the timeline. Can you help me walk it back?" I told myself I was being helpful. I convinced myself I was protecting both of us. I believed that's what partners did for each other. What I was really doing was becoming his shield. I was standing between him and consequences. I was making it possible for him to keep taking risks because he knew I'd always catch him when he fell. 3 years into our marriage, I caught my first real glimpse of how serious things were. A client had accidentally forwarded an email chain to my inbox. I opened it thinking it was meant for me. I read through the messages. I felt my blood run cold. Cameron had promised this client guaranteed returns on their investment. Not projected returns. Not estimated returns. Guaranteed. I knew immediately what that meant. Making guarantees about investment returns was illegal. It violated federal securities regulations. It was documented in writing. It was clear as day. I confronted him that evening. I showed him the email chain. I explained why it was a problem. I watched him laugh and wave his hand dismissively. "Relax, Lena. Everyone says that kind of thing. It's just sales talk. Nobody takes it literally." "The SEC takes it literally," I said. I heard my voice shake with frustration. You could lose your job. You could face criminal charges. Cameron smiled and touched my face gently. No, he corrected me softly. We could lose our jobs. Your name is on the compliance reports for this division. If I go down, you go down with me. I felt that statement land like a physical blow. He was right. I was the compliance officer who'd signed off on his division's quarterly reviews. If regulators came looking, they'd question why I hadn't caught this. That was the first time Cameron explicitly tied my career to his mistakes. That was the first time he made it clear my silence wasn't just about protecting him. It was about protecting myself. And I stayed. I helped him rewrite the email. I coached him on proper language. I made the problem go away. Because I was already complicit. After that incident, a pattern settled into our marriage. Cameron pushed boundaries. I softened the impact. He made reckless promises. I rewrote them into acceptable language. He crossed ethical lines. I erased the footprints. Each time I told myself it was temporary. I believed he would eventually learn. I convinced myself he'd grow up and stop taking unnecessary risks. I repeated the mantra that marriage meant loyalty through difficult times. But somewhere along the way, loyalty transformed into silence. I stopped questioning his decisions. I stopped pushing back on his choices. I stopped suggesting he might be wrong. And silence slowly transformed into complicity. I wasn't just aware of his violations anymore. I was actively helping him hide them. I was using my position in compliance to provide him cover. I was betraying everything my job stood for. I told myself it was love. I believed protecting your spouse was what marriage required. I convinced myself that everyone made compromises in relationships. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was compromising my integrity. I was violating my professional ethics. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize when I looked in the mirror. Every night I went to bed telling myself tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I'd draw a line. Tomorrow I'd tell him no. But tomorrow always became today, and today I always found another reason to stay silent. To protect him. To protect us. To protect the life we'd built together, even as I watched it rest on an increasingly unstable foundation of lies. The compliance audit wasn't random. I learned that later. A junior associate in Cameron's department had reported irregularities to the internal ethics hotline. The company was legally required to investigate. This time, there were records I couldn't fix. The audit team had pulled server logs I couldn't access. They'd recovered deleted emails I'd never seen. They'd collected recorded sales calls from our phone system. I sat at my desk reading through the preliminary audit report. I watched my hands shake as I scrolled through page after page of violations. Sales calls where Cameron made illegal promises. Contracts with falsified projections. Emails sent directly to clients without running them through compliance review first. Cameron had stopped asking me to cover for him months ago. I realized that now. He'd simply assumed I always would. He'd grown comfortable operating in the gray areas because he knew I'd never actually report him. I counted the violations listed in the report. 17 separate incidents. 3 different federal statutes potentially violated. Multiple company policies clearly breached. And at the bottom of the report, one word appeared in bold text next to Cameron's name. Intentional. Not accidental. Not negligent. Intentional violations of securities regulations and company policy. I felt my entire world shift beneath me. I'd spent years telling myself Cameron was reckless but not malicious, careless but not criminal. I'd convinced myself he just didn't understand the rules clearly enough. But the audit report told a different story. It showed a pattern of deliberate deception, calculated risk-taking, intentional rule-breaking. He'd known exactly what he was doing. And he'd done it anyway because he believed I'd protect him from the consequences. Cameron was in the kitchen when I came downstairs that evening. I watched him pour coffee into his favorite mug. I noticed he looked relaxed. I saw him smile when he glanced up at me. "How was your day?" he asked casually. "They're auditing the sales department," I said. I kept my voice flat and emotionless. He didn't even look concerned. I watched him add cream to his coffee and stir it slowly. "Yeah, I heard something about that. Internal audit stuff. Routine." "It's not routine," I said quietly. "There are 17 documented violations, all tied to you." That got his attention. I saw him set down his coffee mug. I watched him turn to face me fully. "Okay, so walk me through what they found. We'll figure out how to frame it." I felt something inside me harden. "I can't." Cameron frowned. I noticed confusion cross his face. "What do you mean you can't? You're in compliance. That's literally your job." "I mean I won't," I said clearly. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush me. I watched Cameron's expression change from confusion to disbelief to anger. "You're my wife," he said slowly. I heard each word land with deliberate weight. "You don't get to stop protecting me now. Not after 10 years. Not after everything we've built together." That was the moment I saw it with absolute clarity. I'd been viewing our marriage as a partnership. But Cameron had never seen me as his partner. I was his insurance policy, his get-out-of-jail-free card, his compliance officer who could make problems disappear. He'd married me because I was useful, because my position gave him cover, because my silence gave him permission to keep breaking rules. I'd confused his need for protection with love. "I'm telling the truth to the audit team," I said. I heard my voice come out steadier than I felt. "I'm documenting everything I know. Every time I helped you. Every violation I was aware of. All of it." Cameron laughed. I heard the sharp, humorless sound fill the kitchen. "You wouldn't dare. You think compliance will protect you when they find out you've been covering for me? They'll bury you right alongside me. You're just as guilty as I am." He was right about that. I knew I'd face consequences for my silence. I understood I'd probably lose my job. I recognized I might face professional sanctions. But I also knew something else. Something more important. "I'd rather lose my marriage than lose my integrity," I said quietly. Cameron's smile vanished completely. I watched his face harden. I saw something cold and calculating replace his usual charm. "You owe me," he snapped. I heard anger crack through his voice. "Everything I've accomplished, I accomplished with your help. Every big sale. Every promotion. Every success. You enabled all of it." "No," I replied. I felt years of guilt and shame crystallize into clarity. "You built your career on my silence. You used my position to cover your crimes. You manipulated my love to ensure my complicity." I paused. I looked at the man I'd married and barely recognized him. "And I let you. I'm guilty of that. But I'm done now. I'm choosing integrity over loyalty. Truth over protection. Myself over us." Cameron stared at me for a long moment. Then he grabbed his keys and walked out. I heard the front door slam. I listened to his car start in the driveway. I stood alone in our kitchen and felt relief wash over me for the first time in years. That night, Cameron didn't come home. Instead, I received text messages. I watched them arrive one after another on my phone. I read each one and felt my resolve strengthen. The first messages were angry. "Do you know what you're doing? You're destroying us. You're throwing away everything we built together." Then came guilt. I thought you loved me. I thought marriage meant standing by each other. I can't believe you'd betray me like this. Then came threats. No one will believe you. They'll see you covered for me for years. You're just as guilty as I am. You'll lose everything too. By morning, I realized something that terrified and freed me simultaneously. The man I'd married wasn't afraid of losing me. He wasn't grieving the end of our relationship. He wasn't hurt that I no longer loved him. He was afraid of losing cover. He was panicking because his insurance policy had expired. He was angry because I'd stopped being useful to him. Whatever love had existed between us had died years ago. I'd just been too busy protecting him to notice. I called a divorce attorney that morning. I scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I started separating our finances and securing my own accounts. I moved forward with ending my marriage because I finally understood it had already ended long ago. I'd just been the last person to realize it. The compliance hearing happened 3 days later. I sat across from the internal audit team and the company's legal counsel. I watched them open their files and prepare their recording equipment. I felt my heart pound, but my voice stayed steady. They asked me to explain my role in Cameron's division. I told them exactly what I'd done. I didn't dramatize. I didn't make excuses. I simply presented facts. I explained how Cameron had asked me to review his emails. I described how I'd helped him reword questionable promises. I detailed every instance where I'd known about a violation and failed to report it. "Why didn't you report these violations when they occurred?" the lead auditor asked. I took a deep breath. I gave them the only honest answer I had. Because I confused loyalty with protection. I believed supporting my husband meant covering his mistakes. I convinced myself that marriage required me to prioritize our relationship over my professional ethics. The room went silent. I watched the auditors exchange glances. I saw the legal counsel make notes. I was wrong, I continued. I felt tears threaten, but I kept speaking. I violated my professional responsibilities. I betrayed the trust this company placed in me. I enabled behavior I knew was illegal. I'm prepared to accept the consequences of those choices. They asked more questions. I answered every single one truthfully. I provided documentation of everything I could remember. I held nothing back. When the hearing ended, I walked out knowing I'd probably lost my career. But I'd finally reclaimed my integrity. Cameron was terminated within a week. I learned about it through the company-wide email announcement. I read that he'd been let go for cause due to multiple policy violations and regulatory breaches. Then came the external investigation. Securities regulators launched a formal inquiry. I watched federal investigators request records. I saw subpoenas arrive. I understood the situation had escalated beyond internal discipline. The charges came a month later. Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty. Cameron was facing potential criminal prosecution and civil penalties. Our shared bank accounts were frozen as part of the investigation. I had to prove which funds were solely mine to get access. Our mutual friends disappeared overnight. People we'd socialized with for years stopped returning calls. My marriage ended not with dramatic fights or tearful confrontations. It ended with paperwork, divorce filings, asset division spreadsheets, legal documents signed and notarized. I moved out of our house into a small apartment. I packed only what was mine. I left behind everything we'd accumulated together. I wanted no reminders of the life I'd built on compromised ethics and misplaced loyalty. The company placed me on administrative leave during their internal investigation. I waited to hear if I'd be terminated or allowed to resign. I prepared myself for either outcome. I'd lost my marriage. I was probably about to lose my career. I destroyed the life I'd spent 10 years building. But for the first time in a decade, I could look at myself in the mirror without feeling ashamed. Cameron called me 2 months after I moved out. I saw an unknown number on my phone. I answered cautiously. I heard his voice and almost hung up. "You're really going through with this," he said. I heard disbelief in his tone. "The divorce. The testimony. All of it." "I already went through with it," I replied calmly. "You could have saved me," he said. I noticed no apology in his words. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just accusation. "You could have protected me like you always did. We could have gotten through this together." "I did save you," I said softly. I felt a strange sense of peace as I spoke. "I saved you every single day for 10 years. Until it started destroying me. Until I realized I was sacrificing my integrity to enable your crimes. Until I finally chose myself over you." I paused. I took a breath. "I can't save you anymore, Cameron. But I saved myself. And that's enough." He hung up without another word. That was the last time we spoke. Our lawyers handled everything else. Divorce papers were signed. Assets were divided. Our marriage officially ended 6 months after that compliance email arrived. I never heard from him directly again. The company didn't fire me. That surprised me more than anything. After their investigation concluded, they called me into a meeting. I walked in expecting termination. Instead, they offered me a position in a different department with a focus on ethics training. "We need people who choose truth when it costs them something," my new director told me. I heard respect in her voice. "You made mistakes. But you owned them. You stopped perpetuating harm even when it meant losing everything. That's the kind of person we want leading our ethics initiatives." I took the position. I rebuilt my career slowly and carefully. I taught other employees about the dangers of compromising integrity for loyalty. I shared my story as a cautionary tale about how easily good people can become complicit in wrongdoing. Today, I live alone in a small apartment. I find it peaceful. I wake up without dreading what email might arrive. I go to work without worrying what I'll have to cover up. I go to bed without carrying someone else's sins. I don't have to rewrite questionable emails anymore. I don't have to soften illegal promises. I don't have to erase evidence of wrongdoing. I don't have to choose between my ethics and my marriage. I loved my husband once. That was real. But I'd confused love with enabling. I'd mistaken protection for partnership. I'd believed loyalty meant silence. My marriage didn't end because I stopped loving Cameron. It ended the day I realized something crucial. Protecting someone who refuses accountability isn't love. It's self-betrayal. And after 10 years of betraying myself, I was finally done. I chose truth over comfort, integrity over security, myself over us. That choice cost me my marriage, but it gave me back something more valuable. It gave me back my ability to look at myself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Some people might say I destroyed my marriage by telling the truth, but I know better now. The marriage was already destroyed. I just finally stopped pretending it wasn't. And in the end, that honesty set me free.